Hi, I'm Steven Rogelberg. I'm the author of the book, The Surprising Science of Meetings. And today on the show, we're going to talk about how to make meetings truly work, leveraging evidence and science.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the interview series. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, many leaders and managers regard ineffective, unproductive, boring meetings as just unavoidable part of the business system. What's more, in the world of remote meetings, those meetings are not only likely to be boring, but they're also incredibly distracted. So how would you up-level your leadership if you understood and used the surprising science of meetings? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly what we're about to find out. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me at dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by Magcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would that do for your authority? Whether you're a coach, a content expert, or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out from the crowd. So if there was a proven way to increase both your perceived authority and professional status in the eyes of your market and do it all at once, wouldn't that be amazing? Well, this is your way to go from being invisible to getting a meeting with absolutely anyone. You can simply go to magcast.co. That's magcast.co, where first-time publishers create thriving magazine businesses. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes on our on the Leadership and Loyalty podcast on the Facebook and LinkedIn groups by the same name, Leadership and Loyalty. If you're a new listener, a new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. And as always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. If you're a regular listener, I want to thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show over time. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. We always appreciate you letting others know about the show and sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Most leaders, and for that matter, most individuals in the workforce know that generally speaking, well, meetings kind of suck. But what if they don't have to? Well, that's what we're about to find out. You see, my guest on this episode is Professor Steven Rogelberg. Now, he is not only challenging the assumption that meetings are a waste of time, but he has the science and the practical strategies backing it up, how to stop wasting time and our energy, actually, and facilitate far better meetings. His latest book was recognized by the Washington Post as the #1 leadership book to watch in 2019. Business Insider made it the top 14 books everyone should be reading in 2019, and SHRM said it was in the top 10 favorite new books. He and the book were also featured on CBS This Morning Freakonomics, and BBC World, just to name a few. He says, rather than canceling meetings, we must improve them by being mindful and skillful about their design and their delivery. We're about to find out exactly how to do that because, as I said, our guest on this episode is Professor Rogelberg, and as I said, he is the author of The Surprising Science of Meetings, How You Can Lead Your Team to Peak Performance. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, please put your hands together and help me welcome Professor Steven Rogelberg!
Very nice. Thank you. That was a wonderful welcome.
You're just getting the chemicals flooding in your
Oh,
brain.
yeah.
Good to have you here, mate. I'm really glad to have you on.
It's
We always like to start our show in this world of influencers or whatever the heck the usual title is, and by asking who is someone who has had a massive influence on your leadership, someone that we maybe won't even know, somebody that maybe not in the eye of the world, who's really influenced you in the way that you see leadership. Who might that be?
Well, yeah, I think it's actually my best friend's father. He was CEO of, I think, CompuServe for a while. He's retired now. But what I took from him was his masterful listening skills. He just had an ability to sit down with someone and just figure out what was on their mind, really try to understand it. And once you truly can understand their perspective, your ability to be a better leader is amplified. And so I really appreciated his discipline and not trying to insert himself too quickly, but instead allow for kind of the natural rhythms to emerge and to not make assumptions that would take the leadership path in one way.
So how did he teach you that? I mean, if he was your best mate's dad, what was that? Tell us how he did that.
Sure. So it was really observing him. And, I got to see him with different groups of people, but probably the most transformative one was actually when he sat down and had a conversation with my father, who was also a business executive. And my father was very stubborn. Once he had an opinion in his head, it was his way or the highway. And just seeing how he interacted with my father and how he was able to get my father to see a different perspective, but not be offended by that different perspective was just transformative.
Yeah, that would be a great example, right? I mean, it's one thing to sort of observe this guy doing it with whoever, but to do it with your dad who's got a fixed mindset and then go, wow, my dad opened up. Well, whatever this guy did, I want some of that.
That's exactly right. Because, I knew how hard it was to move him, right?
Yeah,
I spent my life trying to move him and I was not successful. So just to see like this different communication rhythm and this different communication approach and this more, it was incredible.
Wow. So do you think you're right there committed to following that model?
I did. I mean, it's been a process.
Of course.
For me, I really try to have an open mind towards continuous development, and I look for opportunities to gather feedback and grow from it. I also see every single person and every single leader I interact with is a source of wisdom. And it's either a source of wisdom on what I want to do or what I don't want to do. Yeah. And so I'm just very dialed in and trying to learn as many of these leadership lessons in the small details, right? In the small communications. And from that, I've just been on a path of trying to be more and more of a steward leader, someone who really is in touch with developing their subordinates, trying to elevate the unit, recognize that people can be in different places, but very much trying to enact this stewardship mindset.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, one of the things I spoke about in the intro was how well this book has done. And a book about meetings, well, I'm not expecting that to do particularly well. Personally, just thinking like, that's not. Why do you think that people have really connected with it in such a profound way? I mean, like I just said, how, it's the best book and you got to read it, that kind of thing.
I know. It was crazy. I mean, I know how much people hate meetings, and there's actually lots of books on meetings out there. Yeah. But this was the first book that was really about the science of meetings and laying out an evidence-based path to move forward. So I'm going to assume it was that approach that seemed to really connect with folks. And it was very unexpected. Really, I had no clue about like the Washington Post ranking. You know, when you're a new author, you release a book and then you start tracking your sales numbers on Amazon. And next thing I know, I see the book really, really selling. So of course, the next thing you do as a new author is you Google yourself to try to figure out what's going on. And that's when I discovered, you know, these early rankings, and it just kept building. And it's super exciting for me because, you know, I'm not working on another book. This was it. This represented 20 years of science on meetings. And my motivation here was to get the evidence out so that people can make informed decisions to really recapture the potential of meetings and to help lessen the incredible frustration that people have.
You know, meetings are a finite thing. You know, it starts at 10, it's supposed to finish at 10:30 or whatever it is. But what goes on in the meetings is not so much usually tangible. It's, quote, soft skills. And the fact that you've gone into this from a science point of view, I think is, well, particularly fascinating. So talk to us about the science part of it, because like you said, that's what's really connected with people. First of all, how did you come to the science of it?
Sure. So I'm an organizational psychologist, and as an organizational psychologist, I'm very interested in studying how work affects people and teams and organizations. And my personal target, the things that I like to study, are things that people spend a lot of time in and yet feel very frustrated by, and meetings fit that bill perfectly. Yes. So I very much wanted to connect with meetings to try to figure out a path forward. Now, to study meetings, there's lots of different ways. So if you go through our research, you know, there's approaches where we videotape meetings and we code what goes on in meetings, you know, before, during, and after. We do surveys immediately following a meeting. We'll have people keep diaries at the end of a day where they discuss the meetings they had and how they're currently feeling. We have people evaluate the meeting culture in their organization. We have situations where everyone in the same meeting is surveyed immediately thereafter, just to see if everyone's experiencing the same thing. And they're not. Everyone has very different perceptions. Right. So between surveys, observations, we've even done experiments where we have, we bring folks in for a meeting and then we have someone show up late and we look at the effects of lateness. So we've studied so many different phenomena, you know, from multitasking to leadership effectiveness to meeting satisfaction, all from these varied perspectives.
So that's what I was saying. So there's a lot of factors in there, right? It's not a single thing. So there's a lot of factors in there. And the title of the book is The Surprising Science. So what, as I said, you know, earlier, aside from the fact that the surprise is there is a science, right? What is the most surprising science that showed up?
Right. So first of all, I have to thank Adam Grant. He was kind of my mentor through this process. And I titled the book, The Science of Meetings. And he looked at it and said, you know what, Steven, let's add surprising in there. I'm like, that's brilliant. What a great idea that is. Because I think you're totally right. The first thing that's surprising is that a science exists. Yeah. Then, you know, then there's a whole host of things in there that I think are surprising to people. So for example, agendas. If you open almost any meeting book or go to any meeting training, they always say, have an agenda. But the research on agendas is far from supportive. It's actually not predictive of meeting effectiveness. And if you think about it and step back for a minute, it's really not a surprise, right? What matters most is what's on the agenda. And did you invite the right people that are relevant to those agenda items? And then what's even more important, and I know this connects with you, is how you facilitate that agenda, right? Do you involve people and engage people and create a safe environment? But interestingly, those are the hard things. So, you know, people think that they're a good meeting leader because they have an agenda.
I see.
Right? So it's a false sense of security. So in my book, the chapter's called Agendas Are a Hollow Crutch, because they're not going to get you where you want to go. But would you like to hear a quick innovation in agendas?
Absolutely.
All right. So as you know, agendas are typically structured as a set of topics to be addressed.
Yes.
What I propose is creating your agenda as a set of questions to be answered. This is a fundamentally very different process, right? By trying to create questions, you're really thinking carefully about what you truly want to see happen as a result of the meeting. You have a better sense of who to invite to the meeting because they're relevant to the questions. You know when to end the meeting because the questions have been answered. And if you just can't think of any questions, it likely means you don't need a meeting.
So that's, I mean, I think right there, that's profoundly simple but powerful. So I just want to make sure it gets embedded. So give us an example of something that might normally be on an agenda and what you would change it to so that those people could then say, oh, okay, well, we'd normally put this is on the agenda. We'll change it to that, and that will guide us on who should be in the meeting.
Sure. So an example could be, so you could have an agenda item called budget cuts.
Yes.
Or you could have an agenda item such as, how can we reduce our budget by 25% in Q3?
Okay.
Right? It's a much more tangible challenge that folks have. And it just creates a different frame of mind, right? You know what you need to do, and then that creates that collective focus around.
Well, I think the interesting thing about what you've just done in the simplicity of it there, from a psychology point of view, is you've shifted the person out of threat into solution. So budget cuts is like, oh Christ, I'm probably going to get canned.
Right.
Versus how can we as inclusive means, oh, I'm probably not getting canned, but I'm part of the solution, therefore I'm not part of the problem. So you create a level of psychological safety.
I love that. Yeah, I think you're spot on.
That's profound. Because I think that aside from boring, which often they are, I think that psychological safety is often an issue. And I know you said that earlier. How do we make the meeting a psychologically safe place? And this moving to questions, which is, central to everything I do, which is about curiosity. Mm-hmm. So I love that. So now let's sort of take that a little bit further and say, okay, so where do you think that is that agenda thing that you just said, is that the blind spot for leaders, or is it something more?
Right. So let me back up a little bit and talk about
Please.
That blind spot.
Yeah.
What's interesting is if you survey people at the end of a meeting and you ask them how effective was that meeting, there's one person who leaves that meeting saying that was a good use of time. You want to guess who that is?
I think I know.
Yes. The meeting leader, right? The
Exactly.
meeting leader has this inflated sense of what's going on. And it's really not a big surprise, right? They're in control, right? Everyone else has given up their power and their agency, but the leader is talking a lot. They're in control. They can end it at any point. So they feel good about it. Well, that's where that blind spot comes in, right? Because we know there's a misalignment, right? We know there's so much frustration out there. So that frustration has to be embedded in some truth. And that frustration is global, right? I mean, we see these data no matter what country we go to. So there's this blind spot. And what do blind spots do? Well, blind spots prevent you from really self-reflecting. Right? They prevent you from really empathizing and saying, oh, wow, maybe from this person's experience, the meeting wasn't so good. It affects your appetite for learning, for trying new things. Instead, you just keep doing the same things over and over again. Right. And so that's kind of how that blind spot manifests. And so it could be that you, and I'm sure you've seen this, where, people recycle agendas. Right. So I have someone that does that, where if you look at the agenda week to week, it's like the same thing over and over again. So that would be a way it manifests. It manifests by every single meeting looking and feeling the exact same way, which is crazy, right? Because people need some diversity in their experience. It's manifests in how it's facilitated, right? Where it's not really facilitated. Instead, the leader keeps the focus on themselves.
But I think that a lot of leaders justify that by saying, we have structure. It's structure. Is it structure or is it confinement? I think structure is something you lean on that lets you grow. Like I put structure around my tomatoes plants that allows them to go up and get more fruit. Whereas confinement would be to put them in a box and it wouldn't grow at all. Right. So
yes, I love that analogy.
Okay.
You think about it, the research shows that there's over 100 million meetings a day around the globe.
Wow. That's terrifying.
So I look at it is that there's 100 million opportunities for inclusion.
Yes.
Right? And when you have a confinement approach, when it's so overly structured, then you're missing the opportunity to build inclusion. Yes. And we know from the research that when leaders can create genuine inclusion, creativity, innovation, engagement, all these great things occur.
Of course. So now we have to go to this because it's 2020 as we record this. We're in the second half, the beginning of the second half of that year. The first half of 2020, the world got turned on its ear with COVID, the pandemic, and as I've talked about on some of the other shows, the idea that you can't turn the ship on a dime. Well, many companies discovered, we can. We have to. We got to go remote, and they went remote within 2 weeks. But the problem with going remote is we can no longer walk around the office. We can't have the casual meetings, and now we're having to do remote meetings. So talk to us about how that's changed, and does the approach change?
Yeah. So anecdotally, and it looks like meeting activity is actually up, right? Because people aren't having the casual encounters like you noted. My research suggests that approximately 50% of time in meetings is engaging, well-run, and well-led. That's a pretty sad state, but it gets worse. If you study remote meetings, those percentages decrease even further, right? Remote meetings have all the typical problems of regular meetings, but then they're plagued with some extra special ones, right? You have all these communication rhythm and flow challenges. And then you have something called social loafing. And this is the tendency to reduce our effort and motivation when working in a group. And it's akin to like hiding in a crowd. And we do this more when we feel anonymous. And when we're in a virtual meeting, we tend to feel more anonymous. And this helps explain why multitasking is so high in remote meetings. So they are definitely extra challenging, but there's absolutely an evidence-based path forward that can make these things work. Okay,
so let's just go to that for a minute because I'm talking about it with people about Zoom fatigue, right? It's not literally Zoom, it could be any platform, but Zoom fatigue is the kind of the new phrase. How do we get people to get past that? And moreover, and if we can split it into two if you like, but I really want to look at, what in a meeting, we've talked about just a few minutes ago, there's a need for people in that room to feel like their voice will be heard and that they have trust with the person leading the meeting and that they will, they will be trusted and that they can trust. I really want to confront that in the context of a remote meeting.
Okay. So first of all, meeting fatigue went on in face-to-face meetings. Like we found a strong connection. This Zoom fatigue, yes, takes on new levels, partly because, the technology has challenges, but also people don't get their butts out of the chair throughout the day, right? You can have meeting to meeting and you're never getting up, and that's really fatiguing. So one of the things I tell leaders, for example, is have a standing meeting.
Right.
Literally get people out of their chairs.
Right.
And the data on standing meetings is quite encouraging, and they yield very high quality decisions, but in half as much time. So so let's attack how to make these remote meetings better. And so I'll throw out some techniques. So first and foremost is you can't over-invite. Remote meeting quality plummets as size increases. And there's no reason to over-invite because remote meetings can readily be recorded. And so for those who don't attend live, they can get the recording. So let non-essential members off the hook and just share the recording. That's really key. Number two is setting meeting times properly. People have shorter attention spans right now. So avoid defaulting to these 1-hour meetings, especially because of something called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law is this idea that work expands to fill whatever time is allotted to it. So if we schedule a 1-hour meeting, guess what? It takes 1 hour.
Yes.
So we can use this to our advantage, right? We can schedule a meeting for 20 minutes, for 35 minutes. Like, we have that power. Like, we can make that choice.
Right.
And people will welcome it. And anytime you have a meeting that's 35 minutes instead of an hour, right, you're giving people the greatest gift in the world, the gift of time.
Right.
And then we already talked about sharpening the agenda. People just don't have the patience in remote meetings. So this framing as questions is a way to, really keep that meeting having a good cadence. And another really key thing, and I'll take a breath and then, make sure that we address all your great questions, is active facilitation. Facilitation matters in all meetings, but this is so key in remote meetings. Meeting leaders must embrace their role as a facilitator, right? Draw in virtual attendees because we know that they kind of blend into the background. So Sasha, please share your thoughts, right? To keep them engaged. You might even consider keeping a tally to be sure all are contributing in the meeting, and, avoid generically asking, any comments. Instead, again, call on people. And if someone is kind of just rambling or not focused in the meeting, that's your job to kindly interrupt, right? As a meeting leader, everyone is looking to you to provide some sense of direction and structure. And you have to own that that is your job and really your job alone.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of stuff there to unpack. So first of all, I think a lot of people feel rude about interrupting somebody who's rambling.
Yep.
And sometimes the leader will feel like, well, maybe it's just me and other people. But I think, is there a guideline for that? Is it a time guideline? So one of the things I'll say is, okay, if you could summarize this in 20 seconds, what would you say? Is that a good way to do it?
I like that. So, first of all, what's fascinating to me is it's so rare that a leader ever sets expectations with their team members, right? How can we possibly expect our virtual meetings to be good if we never talk about what makes for a good one? Right. So if you have your team, why not have a conversation about it? It creates a sense of shared understanding. And what will emerge in that conversation, and someone's going to say, you know what, let's keep our contributions short.
Yes.
Right. Let's make sure that we really listen to one another. And by having those expectations out, now the leader has permission, right, to enact that role. Right. And so I feel like that's like a great way of setting the stage for functionality.
Right. Is there, in your research, in the science of it, is there an ideal size for a meeting? Because I think that question comes up all the time.
So there isn't a magic number.
No.
It really, so the thing that we do know is that meetings become dysfunctional the larger they are. We know that inclusion decreases and engagement decreases. very few people can actively facilitate a meeting of more than 8 people. They
More than
think they
8.
can do it, but they can't. It's really a skill to be able to try to bring folks together in a meaningful way. So if you're having discussion, decision-making meeting, my suggestion is really no more than 10 people.
Okay.
Right. If it's brainstorming, you can actually have more people because there's some really nice tools that you can use. And maybe we can talk about that later. So for example, silent brainstorming. With silent brainstorming, you can actually have 50, 60 people and you'll have a really vigorous, powerful brainstorming session. So we can circle back to silent brainstorming if you want to hear that.
Did you say silent?
I did.
Okay, that's interesting. Silent brainstorming. That's, yeah. I do want to go to that, but I want to ask you about that question I asked at the start of this question, which was trust, because I think trust is a massive issue in leadership anytime. It's become a trust psychologically now because of a potential collapse of economies. Is my job safe? Can I trust that this person has my back? Does the leader have my back? Can I trust that person up in the upper left box or the bottom right box or wherever it is? Can I trust that what's the science that's shown, the research has shown, is trust, particularly not only in a meeting, but in a remote meeting?
Big time. And so the seeds of trust, though, should be planted before the meeting, right? Especially during these time leaders should be engaging with their people in a variety of different modalities. So for example, if I'm trying to, develop more trust with you, like you and I should be having one-on-ones, right? We should make sure that we have predictable times that we're checking in. And in fact, I'm a big fan of leaders having these check-in meetings as walking meetings using old technology, right? Just get on the cell phone and take a walk together, because again, that's really refreshing and different. So the leaders plant the seeds in these interactions that occur before and after the meeting, right? That's really where the trust starts to emerge. And then during the meeting, it's about reinforcing that in the values you bring to the conversation, right? When you're facilitating in a genuine way, truly genuine, that trust continues to emerge. If there's a challenge or an issue or something goes awry, that's where that post-meeting conversation, can help kind of that collective sense making. Right. And then the other thing I would say about trust, which I'm a really big fan of, is that, I tell leaders that if you had to pick one thing to do to make your meetings better, the one thing you should do is periodically, send a survey to your team members, asking them about your meetings, what's going well, what's not so well, and what can we do differently. By doing that, right, you're opening yourself up to their feedback. By enacting that feedback, you're acting like a good steward of others' time, right? Meetings are inherently collective experiences. And when you allow yourself to gather that feedback, right, that's another opportunity to demonstrate that people can trust you because you care.
Yeah, I think, if I sort of nail down a lot of what you've said here, it's very much aligned with my position in leadership, that leadership is two-way, not one-way. And that a lot of the time, leadership and meeting leadership is pretty much the same, in that it's boring because somebody's talking at you, rather than a co-communication that is facilitated. And so in the expense of that, I want to come back to, because there are agenda meetings, as in, we need to solve these problems. And then there are a big problem meeting, which is, as you said, brainstorm. And I know that in a remote meeting, which is the world we're living in right now, in a remote meeting, a brainstorm with, I know because I run masterminds, a brainstorm with more than 8 people is a gong show It's just a gong show. And we've got to break people up and do the rest of it. So talk to us about this idea of having bigger ones. And you said silent brainstorming.
Good.
Okay. Tell us
Right.
more.
Good. So
He rubs his hands together.
Yeah, this is exciting. Silence.
Exactly.
So research has looked at brainstorming, where people do with their mouths, kind of around a table or in a Zoom meeting, versus brainstorming where people do it in silence, typing in ideas into a computer or into a Google Doc. And what they find is that when people brainstorm in silence, they generate nearly twice as many ideas, and the ideas tend to be more innovative and disruptive, right? So why would silence promote that? Well, first of all, everyone can talk at once. Right? So that's why it doesn't matter if there's 50 people. It doesn't matter because everyone is able to type in their thoughts and experiences. The very first idea shared doesn't shape you.
No.
Right? Because that's what happens a lot with verbal brainstorming. The very first idea now shapes the entire conversation. So you're able to talk at once, you're able to bring more of your full self, right? And your ideas are less contaminated. So remote meetings are the perfect mechanism for silent brainstorming. I can stick in chat a link to a Google Doc, right? I can share that Google Doc. So now everyone's on their screen, they've got their Google Doc up. I say, okay, we're now going to engage in brainstorming. I could lift one of my agenda questions, stick it on the Google Doc, and basically tell people, okay, start to share your ideas for how we're going to cut the budget by 20%. I want you to look at people's ideas. Everyone just starts throwing them in there. After you've generated ideas for a while, please feel free to go back and look at other people's ideas to see if it sparks new ideas. If you have questions or comments, you can make those in the document. So basically what starts to happen is you have this vigorous discussion where everyone's participating and they're engaging. And next thing you know, you do that for 15 or 20 minutes. As a meeting leader, you're observing this and you might see themes emerge. You might be able to say, okay, look, we actually have consensus. People are saying this, this, and this. Or it might be the case that you need more time. So after people brainstorm for 20 minutes or so, you say, okay, this was fantastic. Let's stop. I'll go back. I'll summarize what we learned. I'll identify the themes, and then we'll come back and I'll share it with you. And maybe what we'll do at that point is even a poll. Right? Where that's another thing we can readily do in remote meetings where people then can identify, for example, the top 5 things that they want to explore. Well, the method I just laid out to you is different, right? It's exciting, it's engaging, and it's fully inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the lovely things about it is you just made sure everybody had a voice. And again, I think that's part of why meetings sort of go down the toilet.
Exactly.
You talked about, I just want to come back to you a little bit because you talked about having a background in organizational psychology. How the hell did that lead you into the science of meetings?
Yeah.
Because organizational, one thinks of as the organization,
Right. I think I got there because I hate meetings so much. Right. So I just personally observed when I had a day full of meetings, I mean, the effects that it would have on me in terms of my frustration. But it was even more than that. I just felt a sense of loss, right? The sense of loss that here we are investing our time with really smart people and not getting meaningful things done or accomplished. So it was that personal experience that kind of really lifted me to want to study these things. And the first kind of studies, the research I did was just trying to link meeting activity to feelings of accomplishment. And basically what we found is the more meetings you had in a day, the less sense of accomplishment that you had, which is a terrible problem, right? People work so much, and to come home not feeling that sense of accomplishment, right? That's a sad state of affairs. And so that's really what fueled kind of my passion around this topic was, just to kind of stop getting people to accept bad meetings as a way of life, right? Because it doesn't have to be. They can be, we can always think about meetings as being places of drain, but meetings done right can be places of gain, right?
Yeah.
You can really draw energy and resources and excitement from a well-done meeting that's short and relevant.
Yeah. The thing about it is that, as you said, I think the leaders will often leave the meeting going, that was a great meeting. But retrospectively, that same leader a week later is like, that meeting was a waste of time because nobody did anything, right? So that's, so the meeting is an achievement for the leader at the time, but retrospectively feels like a waste of time. And for the people who are in the meeting, it might be very much like, in this moment, it was a waste of time.
Right.
Because I don't think that oftentimes, I mean, that's what I was saying about what I liked with your questions as the agenda is it gives a person a sense of what they need to do, as opposed to, well, who would like to do that?
Right.
Anyone?
Right.
Bueller?
Right.
Bueller?
That's right.
It kind of has that sense to it.
That's right. You're absolutely right. It changes the conversation, right? It says that, okay, it stops making meetings a habit and instead saying it's an investment, right? We're using meetings for a purpose. And what's that purpose? Well, it's to answer these questions. And so now, next thing you know, you have this very different perspective about this time. And then because you now see that time as valuable because it's solving these questions, I think you become a better steward of time, right? And you will try new things like silence because it's going to help you answer those questions. So you're just willing to put yourself out there, I think, to be more creative and innovative, and to try to create that more inclusive, safe environment.
So when you say, you brought up a word there that I want to sort of unpack a little bit, because I think it's a word that gets thrown around, but oftentimes is misinterpreted. Stewardship. Stewardship of a meeting. Walk us through that a little bit, Stephen, just because I think it's misunderstood.
Okay. So I've interviewed hundreds of meeting attendees about meeting leadership, and the best meeting leaders appear to have something in common. And what they have in common is they share a similar mindset where they recognize that their role as a steward of their time. And interestingly, leaders often have this stewardship mindset when they meet with customers or board members, right? Because they would never want to waste their time. But when it comes to meeting with our team, we just tend to not have that mindset. So when you have a stewardship mindset, you become intentional, right? From start to finish of that meeting, you decide that you want to make choices. And it doesn't take long. Like, it can take just a minute to kind of think about the meeting and how you want that meeting to look and what's the best way to approach the meeting. And so for me, stewardship is wanting to value people's time. It's about being intentional and thoughtful and recognizing that you have this period of time that people are giving you, which we know that everyone cherishes time, and you want to be a good steward of that time. So you honor it. You think about it, you personally exemplify that all the time. When you think about your interviews and your success, right? It's because that you create a great story, and that's because you're a good steward, right? You think through the experience. You're not rigid because you're flexible, but you still have thought through that experience. Right. And you want to be a good steward of your guest time, but also your audience time. Absolutely. And I think everything you're doing is trying to exemplify that principle.
That's very kind. Thank you. I appreciate that enormously. That is actually very generous. The journey to holding great meetings and engaging people in this way is a journey. And I think that, there are probably people who've become really great stewards at it. And there are probably people who had a sort of somewhat natural ability, if you will, But I think that for most of us, life is a journey in all kinds of ways.
Yep.
Did you used to run, I mean, because you said you hated meetings and you were part of them and they sucked the life out of you. Did you used to run crappy meetings? Was there a time when you were that guy?
So my problem was that I overvalued harmony. So I just wanted harmony in my meetings. And that was my blind spot. And so in collecting feedback, that's really where I learned that to truly be a good steward of other time, we need to have clashes. And my job is actually to encourage the clashes of ideas, not people, but of ideas. And I need to create that environment, kind of this positive turbulence, but I can't be afraid of turbulence. So for me, that was my biggest blind spot that I worked hard on. And it took me a while, but I feel like I'm pretty much there, but I'm still always learning and trying to get better. It was interesting. I've kind of screwed myself because once you write a book about meetings, people expect you to be doing it perfectly all the time. And, if you don't do it, they're on you. So I have to be extra.
According to page 97,
That's
paragraph 3, Stephen, I think you failed there.
Well, it's really funny because when people schedule meetings with me now, there's never a meeting for an hour. It's always an odd time. It's really funny. I get meeting invites for 48 minutes, 23 minutes, right? Because, people they really are trying to demonstrate intentionality.
That's very cool. Just thinking about people doing that to you. Where is there a company or an organization that you feel has really done a great job of taking on this idea of, really applying the science of meetings and taking on that intentionality and stewardship around meetings?
There really isn't.
No?
There are companies that do certain things well. But the company that did it best was Intel, maybe around 20 years ago. I can't remember when Andy Grove was CEO, but Andy Grove was passionate around getting meetings right. And he actually implemented a practice where every new Intel employee had to be trained on meetings. And in fact, early on, he would do the training because he wanted to create that culture of getting these meetings right. So that was a real principled action, right? When the CEO is showing this incredible investment. I can find, companies that I work with, for example, that will start to include content around meetings on their engagement surveys, right? Because right now, most companies have no content around meetings. So despite the fact that everyone's spending all their time, they have no accountability, right? There's no feedback, there's no dashboard. So I know of companies that have implemented that dashboard. So as a result, it's created attention and focus on the topic. So that's been really a positive. I know companies that, where they've made sure that everyone has the training around the surprising science of meetings so that everyone's of the similar mindset, right? Because it's hard. If you're trained and only one person receives that training, it's hard to get everyone on board. Yeah. So they really try to bring out the best. There's companies that have implemented the agenda items as questions approach, where that's become kind of a normative thing. There's companies that have done a really good job, I think, at trying to manage meeting load. So for example, Pfizer, they pretty much have something called Finish It Fridays, which is Friday afternoons is a meeting-free time zone, right? So that people can get their stuff done before the weekend starts. Right. So I could go in, and I did that in the book. I tried to grab different practices from different companies. Like, Amazon does some really good stuff around meetings. And so I put those all throughout there, with the science. And, what's nice is that there are companies that are doing things, they didn't know it, but it's perfectly aligned with the science. So I really try to highlight those as well.
Because there was the whole thing around teams being pizza sizes and all the rest of it, we all heard about. And I get that. I understand that. But, as we were talking about here, size and virtual meetings, remote meetings, I think that the potential for people to zone out or be clicking on email while on a Zoom meeting is so, I know. I mean, I'm very focused in doing these. I do a lot. I probably have somewhere around around 20 meetings a week, right? That's a lot of hours, a lot of time. And because of that, I'm pretty well trained at knowing how to stay focused on it. But I can remember being when I first started doing them, I'd be like writing notes and talking to, and looking at email and, clicking on a Facebook page. And I know that people are doing that. Mm-hmm. And it's not because and one of the things I want to say to leaders, it's not necessarily because you're crappy at leading. It's just, it's a very distracted environment. Yep. So I think that part of the agenda has got to be close everything else off or remove everything else or minimize everything else. And again, that's being a good steward and saying, how do we get it moving forward?
Yeah. Or it even could be, so shortening meeting meeting length is key.
Yes.
If the meeting is longer, take a break in the middle. Like these Zoom meetings typically don't have breaks, but if you tell people, listen, we're going to stop in 20 minutes and people can check their email, go on their, their Facebook, what have you, right? That also is helpful.
Yes.
So you can build in these breaks, but I think that the key thing to stop the multitasking is just to really focus on reducing size and length. People so appreciate that. And really these recordings are beautiful because you can listen to them at twice the speed.
Yes.
Right? And some of them come with transcripts, so you can do a quick search on a topic and find that little snippet that's relevant to you. And so those two actions, I just feel like are just such a great display of stewardship. If I say to you, listen, we're having a meeting, but I don't think it's all that relevant to you, but I'll give you the recording and you can go through it quickly, right? I mean, that's just like, what a kind, generous gift. And this is now I'm giving you back probably an hour where you can recuperate, where you don't have to have, the Zoom fatigue never sets in because you're regaining power and agency.
That's really good. Now, as we come towards the end of this show, I want to ask you a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
How, particularly in this context, how important do you think curiosity is in this particular context?
In meetings or just in this environment with COVID and things like that?
Well, you can go at both.
Okay. Curiosity to me right now is so critical. People are in this mindset of, okay, COVID has happened. How can we do exactly everything we were doing before now?
Yes.
And to me, that's a faulty mindset.
I agree.
The curious mindset is, what are the new opportunities for us given this environment, right? How can we make education better than we ever had it before, as opposed to just trying to do everything we did before in this kind of current context? So I love this idea that when we're confronted with really difficult and challenging things, to feed on that curiosity, because curiosity is about opportunity.
Yeah, I agree fully. What do you think it takes to really be a great leader today? From your experience, I mean, you're a professor, you've even been at UBC.
Yep.
Ooh. UBC, for those of you who don't know, is the university of where I live, in a University of British Columbia, which is actually a very respected university in the world. But you've been at, so what do you think it really takes to be a great leader today?
I think right now, what people want is honesty, transparency, genuine caring, creativity, innovativeness, open-mindedness, that opportunity thinking, right? Those types of characteristics, when you can assure people that, hey, this is rough, right? This is a difficult time, but we can grow from this, right? We can be better. I think that kind of a leadership style, especially if it's accompanied with that honesty and trust that you mentioned earlier, I think can really energize a team and get people out of a bad spiral. Because I think that's, if we do leadership kind of as usual, I think people stay in this bad mental cycle where you're just kind of waiting for COVID to stop. And who knows when it's going to stop? And even when it stops, it's not going to stop, right? No. Things are going to be fundamentally different. So that good opportunity-based thinking, kindness, caring, empathy, I think is the key to moving forward.
Couldn't agree more. I think that it's never been a smart idea to think about getting back to normal in anything. And I think that trying to get back to normal now is really it's less than smart, it's dumb. We've got to look at not even a new normal, like being agile. I did a training a couple of weeks ago and it was called Agile is the New Certainty. And that's what it is. We've got to be agile with whatever it is. And I think that a lot of what you've laid out here in regards to meetings is about agility. It's about curiosity and agility to pay attention with so many things. So as we come to the end, I want to ask you for two things. One is, of course, I want you to let everybody know where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources. But before that, I would really like you to leave our viewers and our listeners with a sort of single practical thing they could go do in the next 24, hopefully the next 24 hours, maybe even less, that they can go to really implement what it is you've been talking about with us. What would that be?
Oh, so that's a tough one because there's so many different practices. Yeah. But I'm going to go back to something I mentioned earlier, where if you truly want your meetings to be better, and you've been doing remote meetings now for a few months, this is the perfect time to do a quick survey of your team.
That's true.
And see how it's going. And I just think that's the greatest way for you to, kind of show your team that you care, and you're going to inevitably find some good tips that way. So I think that's the easiest low-hanging fruit to go after.
That's a great practicality. Just how about surveying your people and finding out how the meetings are going so far and what works, what doesn't work, what could we do better? Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Simple, but great. Steven, please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources, especially the book.
Thank you. So they can visit my website. It's just stevenrogelberg.com, stevenrogelberg.com, or thesurprisingscience.com. And I have tons of resources on there for folks, different assessments and checklists, links to different interviews. So I definitely hope that people will check it out. And my email address is there, so people can reach out if they have any questions. So yeah, stevenrogelberg.com. And
again, that's Steven with a V.
Yes,
and
sir.
Rogelberg is ROGELBERG. StevenRogelberg.com. Of course, we'll post all that. And you can, of course, find Steven also on LinkedIn. Are you on Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of places as well?
Yes.
All under your name?
Yes.
Fabulous. Steven, it's been a pleasure and an honor having you here. Thank you so much, sir. I thank you for the surprising science of meetings. And thank you for being a great guest and for all that you've shared. And I hope that you, dear listener, will put it into action. Remember that you can go chat about this episode with other and hang out with other conscious leaders by going to Facebook or LinkedIn and looking in our groups. There's a Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, you can also go to dovbaron.com, DOVBARON.com, because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire is the one single monolithic difference between greatness in individuals and in companies. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can take meetings from sucking to being exciting, to being invigorating, to being innovative, to being engaging. It's all up to you. Read The Secret Science of Meetings. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.